Good morning, everyone. You've reached the CyVerse Focus Forum webinar series, and I am Tina Lee, your host for this series. Today, we are kicking off our spring series, which will continue bi-weekly on Fridays through May 8th. And we've got a great lineup coming, working on lots of things, including suggestions that people made from last year's webinar season. So without further ado, today's presentation is titled, Don't Let Your Data Drag You Down, presented by Ramona Walls, who is a former CyVerse senior scientific analyst and currently an assistant research professor at the University of Arizona's Bio5 Institute. For those unfamiliar with CyVerse, we are an NSF-funded cyber infrastructure project, and this free webinar series is designed to fulfill part of our mission to train scientists on how to use CyVerse computational resources. We'll take care of some housekeeping real quickly, and then we'll get started with Ramona. Let's see, today's presentation is roughly 30 minutes with time for Q&A at the end. Please open the Zoom chat window and type your questions there for Ramona. She is more than capable and adept at reading questions and giving a webinar, so she may take the opportunity to answer some then, but we'll always have questions at the end for sure. Materials from today's webinar, such as her slides and the video recording, will be posted on our website events page. So check back later today and hopefully we'll have those posted. In just 2 short weeks, CyVerse will be offering our second foundational open science skills course, and in March, our 3rd container camp. Again, visit our website events for more information on these trainings and to register for them. So I am now pleased to introduce Ramona Walls. She's an expert in data management best practices, and she is the godmother of CyVerse's data store and data commons. Welcome, Ramona.
Wow, that's definitely the best job title I've ever had. Thank you. So I love alliterative titles for my talks, so that's how I came up with Don't Let Your Data Drag You Down, though I think Tina had some say in that. But I also really like the title that was proposed to be by my colleague Nirov, which is Grab Your Data by the Horns. So this is me grabbing the data by the horns, literally. And so we're going to help today to hopefully teach you a little bit more about how you can use CyVerse to help get your data under control, manage it so that it doesn't become a nightmare as your project goes on, especially if you're dealing with large data sets. So by the end of today's webinar, we're not going to do walking through this live, but you should at least have the resources to go and be able to create a shared project on CyVerse, to use metadata to manage your data, and to make your data publicly available. If you would like to visit any of our previous topics that are related to this, please go to the links that are on this page. They will be shared at the end of the webinar. So why would you want to use CyVerse for managing your data? So how many here remember playing the telephone game when they were kids, right? So back when we actually had these old-fashioned telephones, and you would, I mean, we didn't have phones like that when I was a kid. It's true, I'm not that old. But we had real telephones where you would call someone and tell them something, and then they'd have to hang up and call the other person and tell them, and then they'd call a third person and tell them. And by the time it got back to you, usually the message was completely different. So we would play it in the bathtub as kids with my family, but people play it, you know, it actually happened in real life. Even though we don't actually have telephones anymore, the same thing can still happen with your data. You take your data, you download it, you do something to it, you upload it again, someone else downloads it, does something else, and basically your data gets passed around and handled around, and by the time it comes time to publish it, you don't even necessarily recognize the data from the original state, and you're not sure which is the right version to use. So it's really important to try to manage your data so that that doesn't happen, and sort of basically moving from, you know, the old-fashioned landline to a modern smartphone where you can send one message to 20 people at the same time and everyone can view it on the cloud, and you don't have to worry about the message getting lost in the translation from person to person. So at the heart of today's tutorial is really understanding about FAIR and FAIR data. So I gave a webinar on FAIR recently, and there's a link to it here. And there's of course also a link to the original publication about FAIR data. FAIR stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable. And so Fair is not only doesn't mean only findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable by other people, although that is certainly very important for reproducible science and for being efficient, making efficient use of data. But it also means being fair to yourself. Can you find your data? Can you access it? Can all of your project members and data sets interoperate with one another? And when you go back 6 months from now to reuse your own data, will you be able to do so? So that's where that's sort of the guideline for here. Okay, great. So Diana got the sound working. Thank you. Glad to hear that. Okay, so I clicked on a link. There's the link. Okay, we don't really need to see that though. What I'm going to start with first is talking about creating a shared project on CyVerse. So there's a few prerequisites. The first is that all of your project members have to have CyVerse accounts. You can do that at user.cyverse.org. And your basic skills that you'll need are to be able to upload and download and move data around on CyVerse. And we have a number of basic CyVerse skills webinars that you can go to for how to see that. For this particular webinar today, I've created a quick start called CyVerse Group Project Quick Start, and the link is here. You can access that by searching Group Project in the CyVerse Learning Center as well. So the first step you need to do to make a group project is to have a data management plan. So I've got a link here on more background. We've got a lesson from our FOSS Foundations of Open Science Skills course where we talk about at length about data management plans. And the materials for that are linked from this page if you'd like to find out more about the DMPs. But the key first steps are you have to decide what the different roles are for each project members, including who has access to what data within the project. You need to think about creating a sort of folder hierarchy. How are you going to organize your data? What file naming conventions are you going to use? And if you're interested, there's a nice link from the University of Pennsylvania website, their library, that gives some tips on that. Then you need to figure out what metadata you're going to need. And it's really important to plan this before you start your project, not at the end of the project, not when you're ready to publish, because you need to be collecting that metadata as the data are being collected. And finally, really important, write the plan down. Don't trust it to memory. Don't just talk about it, especially if you've got more than one person in your project. You need to have something in written that everyone can see and refer to make sure that they're all following along and keeping up with it and complying by the standard operating procedures. So once you've got your plan, then you need to follow through. So what you should do. Most projects of any size will assign a person to be the data manager. Often that's the PI. It might be the lead postdoc, or it might be an actual lab manager, depending on the size of your project. But that person will then be responsible for creating the folder hierarchy within the CyVerse data store, assigning the appropriate permission and assigning the appropriate permissions. Even if it's a big project and the PI is not the data manager, I know that's often the case, it's still very important that the PI be the owner of the data folder. Why is that? Because people leave projects, students graduate, postdocs get jobs, and even with the best intentions, people can disappear for various lengths of time. And you want to make sure that the person who's ultimately responsible for the project has access to all of the data. So that's why I highly recommend, and what's written down on the quick start that I've linked you to, is that when you want to create a shared project, the PI should go into their home directory, create the project folder there, and then assign permissions to the appropriate data manager, who can then go through and do the rest of the permissions. That way, since the PI is the owner of the top level folder, they will always have access to the documents within it. So that's set up. Once you've got your data store up, your data organization up and running, and your workflow set up, you need to stop and think about your data management plan occasionally. So conduct some regular quality assurance activities like data cleanup and making sure that the data are meaningful. Do you have outliers? Do you have column headings that nobody understands what they mean? You don't want to have those, right? Make sure that people are complying by your data management plan. Are they adding the metadata? Are they organizing naming the files the way that they're supposed to? Or are people just kind of going off and doing their own thing? So you want to check in on that from time to time. And data management plans, like all plans, will change. That's fine. Adjust them if you need to, but write down the changes too. Don't trust to memory again for those important changes. I just wanted to stop. So this came in the half hour before I was preparing this call. I got a notice about this paper that just came out. And it's in Nature, 11 tips for working with large data sets. It's a really, I think it's a great paper if you're trying to manage big data sets. Rather than recapitulate everything that it says here, I've shared the link with you, and I urge everyone to go and read it. It's a very short, quick paper. There's one challenge, however, that arises with this. One of their key recommendations is to keep track of data versioning, and you do need to do that. It's really important. But CyVerse does not, unlike Google Docs, CyVerse does not have automatic versioning. So when you change a file in CyVerse, you're overwriting the original version. Just be aware of that. And the reason we have that is because we've got something like 4 petabytes of data on CyVerse right now. And so it's just unrealistic to version all of those very large files within the resources that we have. So what you need to do as part of your data management plan is to think about how you're going to version it. What versions are you going to save? How are you going to name them? How are you going to keep track of them? One nice thing that if you're doing it in CyVerse, if the actions that change your data, so if you have a version and then you do some analysis, some manipulations on it, for example, using maybe an R script in one of our interactive apps, and then you output a different data, the metadata associated with that will show the application that created it, et cetera, the date. So some of that tracking will happen automatically through CyVerse. Just checking questions. We have 6 petabytes of data, not 4. Okay, so again, lots and lots of data. All right, so let's go on to metadata. So metadata is really probably the most important thing that you can do for your data management plan. It's really important for making your data fair. So if people want to find it, access it, reuse it, etc. It can help improve search particularly. So in that findable part, metadata is really important. It's crucial for tracking provenance, and that's what I was just talking about with versioning controls. Like if you're doing manipulations on data, you want to know you have some output data and you have some input samples, and what happened to all those things in between. Metadata is where you can keep track of all that information. And many people rely on their folder names and their file names for organizing their data. I suggest that you use meaningful folder names and organize your data in a helpful way. But if you're dependent on that for sorting your data, it can be very limiting. Suppose that you have a big study, you've taken 10,000 images of 5 different species over the course of 3 years under 5 different treatments. And you've got your data set up by species, and then year, and then treatment. And then suppose you actually need to go and pull out a data set that shows all of the images from the same treatment across all the different species. Well, you don't have the data organized that way. You're going to have to go into your 100 or whatever different folders and pull out the data sets that you need. If you've got the appropriate metadata on each of those images for species, treatment, year, then you can just do a query that says, get me all of the images that used treatment X, and it will sort them. And you can store that search query and regenerate that list whenever you need to. So it makes it really helpful in dealing with these very large data sets that have many, many files in them. I'm going to demonstrate how that works in just a second. In CyVerse, we have metadata in 2 different flavors. System metadata is metadata that are added automatically. So those are, for example, when you upload a file, it makes a note of the date and time of upload, who uploaded it, what file type it is, and then whenever you do any analyses, the analyses automatically say, we'll record again the time, the person, etc. And so that's not something that you can change, but it's very useful, and they're available to you. We also have what we call user metadata, which is customizable, and that's metadata that you can add to your files, and that's what I'm going to show you next. So I'm going to take a break from the slides and do a quick live demo. First, I'm going to show you some of the metadata features I've been talking about, so how to add metadata in the discovery environment, how to use bulk metadata upload, searching based on metadata, and using metadata templates. And I'm going to go through this, I realize, fairly quickly. So there is full documentation of this available on our wiki, and it's linked here. Then I'm going to go back, since I talked about sharing data with your collaborators after the metadata demo. I'm going to go back to what I talked about earlier and just highlight a few things about how you share data in the discovery environment. So let's escape here, go to the browser. And I'm in the discovery environment now, and I want to show you about metadata. So any file or folder can have metadata on it. So you can see I've got some folders here, and I'm in my home directory here. I can get to the metadata in two different ways. One is under the metadata menu. I can say edit view metadata. Notice that I can also copy metadata from one file to another or one directory to another. I can export, save the metadata. I can download templates, etc. So I can also get to the metadata on this little 3-dot menu, which is basically the menu for the most popular items. So I can click over here and also see edit view metadata. And you can see, oh, there's no metadata on this particular folder. So let's add something. I'm going to say plus, and it gives me a new attribute. It's just called new attribute by default. If I want to edit that, I click on the little pencil. And one thing to be aware of here, a little trick, sometimes depending on your screen configuration, if the way this is, especially if you're working on a laptop with a smaller screen, this little pencil icon might be off the screen and you have to scroll over and you don't see it. I've actually, like when I first started using this interface a few times, I was like, why can't I edit my metadata? I just have to scroll over. So be aware, it's there. You just might have to look for it a little bit. So you click on the pencil and you can edit, and I can rename this, rice folder. I'm just making up name. Oh, sorry, we'll name it folder name. Will be the attribute. And rice folder. And there's no units for this one, of course. I can, if I want, put child metadata on there. So something like name type, and it's a title. Okay, so I hit the back arrow, and you can see now that I have one attribute called folder name with the value rice folder, and it has one child metadata there. So I can save that, and now the metadata is there for all to see. So let's look within that folder and see what we've got. We've got a bunch of different files. This is a made-up example, but there are real examples of this. This works very much in the same in real life. It's just done to be quickly. So imagine that these are all text files that have something to do with descriptions of different rice species. And I've been collecting metadata on them, and I want to put the metadata on all of the folders at once. Now, it's not that bad if there's only 8 of them like this, but if I had 100 of them, to enter each one 100 times would be very tedious. So what I've done is that I've taken my metadata and put it into a CSV spreadsheet, which is the way that many people are working anyway. They've got a spreadsheet already where they've written out all of their metadata. And you can see that the first column has the name of the file. And then the columns 1 through 5 are metadata about each individual file. So it tells you the plant ID, which species it came from, which type it was, treatment, the day of year, etc. And so I can go ahead, and if this is because this file is located within the same directory as the data itself, I only have to list the file name. If I uploaded this metadata file to a different location in the CyVerse data store, then I would need to include the full path name for the file in the first column. And that's all documented in the wiki documentation. So I've got some metadata here. I want to apply it. Let's see what we got. Difference between metadata and child metadata. So metadata, so let's look at our metadata again. So you see this is a plant ID, so this doesn't have any children on it. But if I wanted to give it a child, I could click on, I would edit it and add a child metadata. And so basically metadata is data about data, right? So a metadatum, in this case, the plant ID is data about the file 123 text. If I add a child metadata here, essentially I'm saying this is metadata about this metadata. So my child attribute, which was, I could call it something like ID schema, and it could be PO for the plant ontology. That's made up. It's not actually what it is, right? But so imagine that you want to use, so we're sort of refining things in multiple levels is what we're doing with the child metadata. I'm not going to save this because it was just a made up example. Okay, so let me close this. So I've got my my metadata file uploaded. I've got all of the folders here, and now I want to apply the metadata that's in this file to each of these folders. So what I do is simply go under metadata. Oh, I have to click something. Metadata. Oh, sorry, I have to click the right thing. Let me get up one level here. And I'll click on it and go metadata. apply bulk metadata, and I select the file. So in this case, I'm going to browse to where the file is. It's in the same directory under this ABC123. I select the file here, and I say, okay. I'm not actually going to do this because I've done it already to save time, but this is as simple as just hit OK. So I'll cancel it. And then I'll go back into the directory, and you'll see what had happened the last time I did this. So as I kind of already gave it away when I was talking about the child meta, but each of these files now has metadata applied to it that comes directly from that template. So you can see that these match the column headers that were in my template and the values that were in each row. So why is this useful to me? Again, as I mentioned an example, suppose I want to find all the files that have the same treatment type of cold, and I have more than 8 files. Imagine that I have 8,000 files, and I need to find all the ones that go cold. Now I can use the search feature to find those. So I can see here and go under the metadata. So let me just go a little more slowly over that. In the search box here, there's a little looking glass or magnifying glass icon. So I click on that to get the advanced search topic. I click on the plus. I only need one, so I'm going to trash one of them. And instead of file name, I want to change it to metadata. So metadata, where the attribute is treatment and the value is cold. Now I can save this search as I want, and it will come back, it will redo the search every time. So if I've added new data, it will update the data set list. But I won't have this, it's not a big deal for one, but when you have more complex searches, it's nice to be able to save them and give them a name. I'm going to just go ahead and search without saving it. Unable to search, please try again later. Well, I'm not going to be able to show you that. I don't know why it's not able to search, but it's not. But if it were searching the way it normally does, then what it would return would be a list of files that would show me which of these would basically give me every other one in this list that has the metadata of cold associated with it. Okay, so let me just check my list. What else did I want to show? Metadata templates. So another way to apply data in a standardized way is using templates. Right now, we don't have the ability for users to create templates. So if you need a template for your project, you need to contact us, support at CyVerse.org, and we can create a new template for you. We do have some existing templates, and I'll just show you the one that's used when you want to publish data. So again, imagine that I would like to create a DOI for this data set called A123. Well, first thing I would do is probably give it a more meaningful name, but that's okay, I haven't. So I can go under metadata, edit view metadata. And then within there, you see there's a little, an icon that looks like a menu. And so we look on that, and that shows us the different templates that are available. So in order to publish data through CyVerse, I need to use DOI request data site template. I can click on little I to get some information about that. And then I can click on the actual template, say okay, and it will open it up. And now you can see that same kind of metadata interface that you could do customly has already been pre-populated with you to the fields that you need to apply. And this also provides a great example of the nested metadata where you have child metadata. So one of the required fields is title, and you have to say what title type it was and what language it was. A creator is another one that has nested metadata. So you give the name of the creator, and then if you know it, it's great to give their name identifier. We only support ORCID as identifiers at this point, so we urge people to put in the ORCID identifier here. And you can see even the name identifier, which is a child metadata, has its own child metadata, which is the name identifier schema and the schema URI. So you can go on like that. Some of the fields in the templates can be pre-populated, as in the case of the publisher. So you can have drawdown lists. So the resource type general is a drop-down list. You can choose from one of those, etc. And so this is how you use templates to standardize the metadata within your projects. I'm going to go ahead and close that because I haven't made any changes. All right, and close. So that's what I want to show you about metadata today. It can be very useful. Let me just check the chat. I think we have one more question here. If I add my metadata template and reapply the template to the same data, will it duplicate the original fields? No, it won't. And that's actually a really cool thing about metadata in CyVerse in the discovery environment, is that the metadata templates are essentially views on the metadata. So the individual attribute value unit, we call triples that we call them, so each piece of metadata, as it were, is stored in a database. And then when you when you apply a template, the fields are automatically filled in from where you have applied metadata. And so the nice thing is that if you have the same field in multiple templates, you only have to store that metadata value once, and it will actually be applied to any of the templates in which that applies. You can, even though it won't duplicate the original fields, though you can, in most of the metadata templates, duplicates are allowed. So for example, if you had a journal where a data set where there were 5 creators, you just hit the plus sign next to that creator field, and it enters 5 different creator fields for you that you can fill in with the names of the 5 different people. All right, so that's using metadata. I want to talk, just since we talked earlier about setting up a folder system and sharing data with your collaborators, I wanted to give you a quick demo of how that happens. First, you should know about under the little preferences and groups that there is a way to list collaborators, and collaborators are just people that you work with regularly. So I've got a list of collaborators called UI scientists, analysts, and that includes the various people in my team that I might want to share things with, so I can add them to this list. I will also show you that you can create teams, and you've got different teams here, and you can use those teams also to share analyses, to share applications. You can't use the teams and collaborators. You can use collaborators to share data, but you can't use, I don't think, the teams to share data right now, but that will come soon. So let's talk about sharing data. It's pretty basic. Suppose I have this folder again, and I want to share it with one of my collaborators. So I go under Share with Collaborators. You can also get there from the top menu where it says Share with Collaborators. And I can choose collaborators. Remember, I showed you how to add a collaborators list. I can choose the collaborators, and I can go like that and say, share it with everyone who's on that UA collaborators list. There's no one actually in that list, I think is why it's not showing up right now. I can also search for individual users. So I'll search for Tina Lee. And there she is, and I can share with her. And you see her, by default, she has permission to read this. I could also give her permission to write, which means that she could create new folders within here. Or I could give her own permissions, which means that she could change the names of folders in here and move things around. Important to remember that if you give someone own permission, that means they can rename and delete things. So be very cautious about giving out ownership permission. The way that we generally set up group projects is that we have a parent folder where the data manager and the PI are the owners of the parent folder. They'll create a subfolder within that for each project or collaborator or site or whatever, and give one person ownership permission of that subfolder. And then they'll only have ultimate control over the data that their team is uploading into that folder. And then we give the whole team read permission so that everybody can see all of the folders. But there are various ways that this can be worked out. All right, so what else did I want to show you? I think that's it for basic sharing. The only thing I'll point out then is that if you're used to working on the command line instead of the discovery environment, there's a command called Ichmod that you can use in iCommands to give sharing permissions to different users with read, write, and own options, just like in the DE. So I think, what else? Oh, we're going to just talk one more thing about publishing your data. So publishing and public data. Public data is data that anyone can see. So we have in the CyVerse Data Commons, the community release folders. These data sets are not necessarily fair because there may still be restrictions on using them, but they are there available publicly for anyone to see. Published data, on the other hand, means that it's in a repository. So in CyVerse, we have the CyVerse curated data, where each of the data sets have a permanent identifier in the form of a DOI, Digital Object Identifier. All the data that's published has to have a license. We actually ask all users to use it to make their data open source, to put on an open source license. And they have to have standard metadata. So I think you can clearly see that there's a lot more requirements for being published than there are for being public. So in order to be fair, it's really important that you actually publish your data, which is not to say that there aren't many uses where public data is important. You might have data that you're still working on, it's not finished, but you want to get it out there for everybody to see. Maybe you've got some initial assemblies on a genome that you're working on and you want to share them with the community for feedback. You go ahead and you put it in something like a public data folder so everyone can work on it. And then as it becomes standardized and complete, then you can publish it and get the DOI for it. If you're interested in publishing data through the Data Commons, please visit datacommons.cyverse.org. We've got a tutorial from a previous webinar that I gave about how to request a DOI. We've got links to different workshops on how to publish to NCBI's SRA or whole genome sequencing, whole genome shotgun sequencing or archives. and of course publishing to the data commons itself. And with that, I'm going to look at the chat. I never went back to the full screen view. Well, I think everyone can see it. That's all right. So I'm done with the slides, and I will look at the chat questions. So please put more questions in the chat if you have them. I think you can unmute now. So
they can, yes. Thank you, Ramona. There was one additional question about, does CyVerse provide storage for free? And yes, we do. With each user account, you get 100 gigs for free. There's more available, right? I think for active analyses, or if you're in a certain type of collaboration where you request from our science team.
There's so if you go to user.cyverse.org, our user portal, there's a menu there for forms, and one of the forms is how to request additional data storage. It's very easy to ask for up to 10 terabytes of storage. I'm sorry, I was getting little chats while I was saying that. So yes, you can, and we do expect that for shared projects, that if the PI is putting all of the data for the shared project under their home directory, we expect them to request more data because they would need to use that. Mira was telling me that the search feature is now available on QA, but I'm not gonna, I hope that people understand how it works without actually having seen it. So I'm not gonna go back and demo it, but you can see that as we were giving the live demo, our team became aware of the problem of the search not working and has got it fixed already on our testing server. So that should be up and again working very soon.
Any other question about our data on CyVerse backed up?
Oh, yes, they are. So we have our data. We have the main data store is here at the University of Arizona, and it's replicated at the University of Texas, the Texas Advanced Computing Center in Austin. And so it's quite safe.
Right, it's mirrored. Okay, well, I'm gonna give people another minute or so to ask any questions. And in the meantime, I'll just let you know what our next webinar is about. In 2 weeks, on February 14th, John Fauner of CyVerse partner, the Texas Advanced Computing Center, will be doing a webinar titled Fall in Love with High Performance Computing at CyVerse. In honor of Valentine's Day, we're going to show you all the wonderful things that you can do or how to access HPC resources that are provided through TAC, our partner. And so that was one of the things that someone had requested from last season's webinar. So we are thrilled that John will be able to explain some of the basics for people. In the meantime, let's see, there's a question. I will be uploading data to iPlant for the herbarium for collaboration. Do you recommend I have a more personal user rather than an herbarium account? So I guess a personal versus like a team account.
Yeah, so as a general practice, we recommend that group projects have used the personal account of the PI of the project. In the past, under the iPlant community release data, which is the iPlant home shared folder, we would give shared folders to many different projects. And it just became a nightmare and a mess. And so, and there's not really a need for it. So what we ask is now, if you have a group project, please put it in the personal folder of one of the lead personnel of the project. That said, we still do, of course, issue community release folders, and often for projects, we actually have a number of projects specifically for herbaria, where they're making the data publicly available as soon as it's uploaded. And so if you want to do a group project where your data is going to be public, then it's very appropriate to request a community release folder or a shared project folder and put all of your data in there. And Beth, if you're not already working with one of the projects that we support, please do reach out to me after this webinar, and I can put you in touch with some of them, because we have a number of SOPs already developed for uploading and managing herbarium data. We're supporting a number of the thematic collection networks from IDBio for that. Yeah, okay, great. So Beth, if you have more questions, if I didn't answer your question, then please feel free to send me an email.
Right, okay. Well, if there are no further questions, that'll be it for today. We hope to see you in 2 weeks for Falling in Love with HPC Resources at CyVerse. Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you, Ramona.
Thanks everyone, bye-bye.
Bye.